We're joined by Rolf Olsen, who is the Chief Political Officer, U.S. Consulate. Thank you for coming in this morning.
Pleasure to be here.
Very interesting times, really. And yes, they describe this election as one of the most exciting elections America has had. And we just saw Mitt Romney giving his speech, addressing his supporters. Take us through, maybe briefly, if you will, how this eventually culminated into this victory for Barack Obama.
Well, it's interesting. Certainly, it's been a very combative 4 years of his term. Republicans in Congress obviously have great differences of opinion with him on a wide variety of substantive issues. Yet, nonetheless, he seemed to maintain a connection with the American people over time. And at the end of the day, when presidents can only serve 2 terms, so they get 1 chance at re-election. And people sort of step back and seem to say, no, I like this guy, I like the way he's doing things, and so they got to give him another shot. So it was a very closely contested election. It was a narrower margin of victory than what he enjoyed in 2008, but it'll be incumbent upon him and, of course, the Republicans in Congress as well to work together and on behalf of the American people.
You know, people had always wondered that, in spite of the fact that it was really close, at the time 1% separating both parties, yet Americans have to close ties, they have to come together and move ahead. How do they always do that?
I think our founding fathers really set the tone. The whole design of our government through the Constitution is about checks and balances. We don't have a parliamentary system where one party really has full control at any one time. That can happen, but it doesn't happen automatically. And the American people make their decisions for their own reasons. And so in some cases they may say, oh, I'm going to vote for a Democrat for president, but I'm going to vote for a Republican for my member of Congress. Sometimes they do that quite intentionally. Other times simply because they just like those 2 individuals. But I think we've realized throughout the course of our history, and it's 236 years of independence and 224 years with our Constitution, that you have to find common ground. You have to find consensus, otherwise things don't get accomplished. That's actually one of the criticisms of the last couple of years between President Obama and the Republicans is they haven't gotten enough done because they haven't found enough consensus. So that's going to be a real challenge for them now going forward is how do you identify those areas of common ground where you can actually make decisions and really build the country for the future.
It's very interesting you mentioned that, sometimes the vote can vary. I mean, people can decide to vote as a way of splitting power, vote for different parties as a way of splitting power personally, or because they like the individuals. Then what would you say is the role of ideology? Because when you're looking at the local process here, most times people criticize the local parties for saying, well, they're promising the same thing. There's really no thrust of ideology here. It's interesting that it also does happen that sometimes people are not voting along the lines of ideology.
It's a very good point. There are some people in the United States who vote very strongly along lines of ideology. A significant segment, let me put it that way. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who vote based on personality. Individuals that they either just like personally or that they believe can actually do a good job. And then there is some element of people who just simply say, I want the government to do what's best, to do what's right. And in some cases they may say, you know what, I think this particular presidential candidate meets that criteria, but a congressional candidate from a different party or a gubernatorial candidate from a different party may have that in mind. One of the interesting things for us to watch in the United States in the last 2 weeks is the hurricane that hit early last week, and how much Governor Chris Christie, a Republican of New Jersey, and President Obama, a Democrat, worked very closely together. They were seen publicly together on a number of occasions. They said good things about each other. And that's something where when there was a natural disaster, it was incumbent upon both of them to really work on behalf of the people of that area, and they seem to do that successfully. And I think American people appreciated that from both of them, that they were able to say, you know what, this isn't the time for partisan arguments. It's the time for really moving the country forward and trying to repair the damage from this particular hurricane. That's just one example, but there are times when that can happen, and I think it happens more than people realize. I think the media in the United States tends to overplay the negative. That's my own personal opinion, but I just think that's a common thrust is when somebody says something controversial or very negative, it's easy to get the attention when in fact there is a lot of compromise and consensus that occurs on a daily basis. It just doesn't necessarily get a lot of attention.
I think another thing, now that you've mentioned it, it's something that you cannot overlook as much as you try to, is the role of the media in politics in the United States. Even before the elections proper itself, We already had polls saying that it was going to be a very close race, and even when the elections were going on, we're already getting exit polls. You know, one would wonder how do people of the United States live through that, and even the politicians themselves.
Well, it's funny. No matter how much one is addicted to politics in the U.S., and there are some of us who are and others who don't care about politics at all, I think we all get to the first week in November and we're about ready for the election to be done because it lasts for so long.
Yeah.
If you're in one of the states that's very contested, almost all of the television commercials you see when you're watching television these days are political commercials for one campaign or another. And I think people grow weary of that over time, but nonetheless, it's a very robust system and it works for us. The media does play a tremendously important role. One of the parts about the electoral process that I think confuses a lot of people outside of the United States is we're actually seeing the results announced by the news networks in the United States. We have no national electoral body in the U.S. like INEC here in Nigeria. And so there is no one body that comes out and says, okay, here are the results for all the elections. We actually have 50 different elections at the same time that the states run individually. The reason the results come out by the media
quickly,
because, of course, the media wants to make the news and announce the news when it happens. We could wait until all of the states certify their election results. That would take days. That's how it used to be done. But in this modern age, what happens is the news media hire their own consultants who look at the numbers that are coming in, and then they can make an evaluation. Okay, President Obama has won enough votes in this particular state that clearly Governor Romney can't overcome him, or vice versa. So even just in the mechanics of election day, the media, besides covering the event, actually plays a very instrumental role in announcing the results and informing the American people. Never mind the fact that during the course of the campaign, of course, the reporting, the questions they ask, all of those things are very, very much a central part of our political system.
I mean, yesterday I saw that while you were speaking on a number of issues, you talked about the fact that the media has got to give equal. All right, welcome back. Apologize for that break in transmission. Well, yeah, you know why it happened. Well, getting back to this one now, I was talking about last night. You spoke about a number of issues. Media giving equal time as long as they can pay. But the thing is, how do you guard against tampering? Because since you don't have anybody like INEC here that coordinates and submits to the media who in turn announces results, those kind of cases can come up once in a while.
Well, we have no national electoral body. We do have state election officials. I mean, there are official election bodies. In most states, it's called the Secretary of State. Very different than my boss, who's really effectively the Minister of Foreign Affairs. But each state, they're in charge of many different administrative processes in the state, and in most cases, they're in charge of the elections as well. And so they oversee the rules. In many cases, the actual localities, like I vote in Arlington County, Virginia, which is just outside of Washington. The county itself emails me while I'm overseas, emails me the ballot, I fill it out, sign it, and then mail it back. But it's a Virginia state election. But there are official poll workers. If you go to vote in a polling booth there, they're paid. Some of them are permanent employees of the Secretary of State's office. Others of them are just hired for a brief period of time around the elections. But they're all certified, they're trained, and you know there are various steps in place to help prevent fraud, because that's obviously something that everyone wants to avoid. And it's at this point now the process is reasonably well established in terms of having to prove your identity when you're registering to vote, and then actually when it comes time to voting. So at this point, we don't really have many instances, very few instances actually, of actual voter fraud.